We're on the top of Daf Ayin Chesam Beis on the second line, and we're trying to figure out how to reconcile Rabbi Yossi with our Mishnah. Ella, the Gemara says, you're right. In the case of a tzibur, even Rabbi Yeshua agrees that you could be zarek the dam without the basar nitma basar. Why? Because tuma hutra b'tzibur, and Rabbi Yossi himself was only discussing the case of a carbon yachid. So how do you accept both Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yeshua? Ro'ani as divrei Rabbi Eliezer b'di'eved, v'divrei Rabbi Yeshua lechatchila. We suggested earlier that when Rabbi Yeshua said that we're not going to be zorik the dam or be makter the komets if nitma basa shirayim, that was only lechatchila. But Rabbi Yeshua b'di'eved accepted the validity of the carbon if he went ahead and he was zorik the dam. And says Rabbi Yossi, I'm going to accept the position of Rabbi Yossi, of Rabbi Yeshua, that l'chatchila we should avoid the zrika sadam. And b'di'eved, I'm going to accept Rabbi Eliezer that we can validate it. So the Gemara says, what do you mean you can accept Rabbi Eliezer and validate it b'di'eved? Di'eved afilu Rabbi Yeshua nami modehu. The Ketani, we had a brisa that we learned on Daf Ayin Zayin, Mod Rabbi Yeshua im Zarak Hurtza, that if even though the basar contracted tumah, if he went ahead illegally and he was Zarik the dam, the carbon is valid. So what are you telling me? Roa Aniyas Divrei Rabbi Eliezer b'di'eved. Rabbi Yeshua never argued against him b'di'eved. So the Gemara says no. Don't ask me a kasha from the brisa that Rabbi Yeshua is moda b'di'eved ha b'tumah v'ha b'avud v'saruf. That which Rabbi Yeshua said that I'm moda b'di'eved if the Kohen went and he was zorik the dam, even though the basar is tameh, that's only in the case where the basar exists on the world. It's accessible, but it's tameh. So then Rabbi Yeshua validates b'di'eved post facto the zrika sadam. However, Rabbi Yeshua never was committed to validate the zrika sadam in a case where the basar is completely gone. It's avud v'saruf. Rabbi Yeshua never said that b'di'eved the carbon is kosher. And now we go back to Rabbi Yossi, and Kika Amar Rabbi Yossi, Ro'ani es divrei Rabbi Eliezer b'di'eved, and we just asked the question, why did Rabbi Yossi have to say that he accepts Rabbi Eliezer b'di'eved? Even Rabbi Yeshua agreed and validated the carbon b'di'eved if the Kohen went in. And the answer is be avud b'saruf. Rabbi Yossi is going to accept Rabbi Eliezer b'di'eved in the case of avud v'saruf, which is a case where Rabbi Yeshua would say it's possible. There is no basar at all. And if there's no basar at all, it's not chai v'kayim, it doesn't exist in the universe, then the carbon is possible according to Rabbi Yeshua. Here's where Rabbi Yossi tips the scale and accepts the sheet of Rabbi Eliezer in a case of avud v'saruf, that b'di'eved the carbon is kosher, which means that at the end of the day, Rabbi Yossi falls back on the position that yech dam below basar. And this Rabbosai leads us to the Mishnah here on the top of Daf Ayin Ches Amid Beis. Now, the previous Mishnah had listed all the karbanos tzibur that could be brought b'tumah, and that there's a difference between the carbon Pesach and all other karbanos. All other karbanos, you can bring the carbon b'tumah if it's a carbon tzibur, but you can't allow the tmeim to eat from the basar. But in the case of Pesach, not only is the carbon brought b'tumah, it's even eaten b'tumah. And one of the dinim of zrikas dam al gabi mizbeach, that it's matir the basal achila and the emurim fakrov al gabi mizbeach. But if the bas and the emurim are not ru'uyim l'kach, let's say they contracted tumah, or maybe they were even lost, So we said that there's machlokas between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua in that case. Rabbi Eliezer says you could be zorik the dam even though there's no basar, and the bailim have fulfilled their obligation. According to Rabbi Yeshua, if the basar is completely gone, then there's no dam, there's no zrikas hadam, because if ain basar, ain dam. However, Rabbi Yeshua agreed that if nitma only one of the two, either the chelev limurim or alternatively the basal achila, then the dam can be implemented, zrikas hadam, and the reason for that is because there's basar haroy lachila, one of these two categories. Mishnah says nitma basar v'chelev kayim. If the basar of the korban pesach became tomei, the chelev is not tomei, so we can do the aktaras hachelev hachalovim, but we can't eat the basar. Is eno zorikas adam. Korban pesach is different than all the other korbanos, because in the case of all the other korbanos, even if you don't eat the basar, that's fine. The carbon is meaningful as a kiyum carbon with a recent carbon, even without the achilas habasar. But not so in the case of korban pesach, because eno ba el l'shem achila. Therefore, if nitma basar, even though the chelev is kayam, you could have achilas mizbeach without achilas adam, is eno zorikas hadam, because the ikar, the main thrust and the purpose of the korban pesach is to eat the basar. On the reverse side, here we could be more lenient. Nitma chelev habasar kayim zorikas hadam. You can go ahead and be zorik the dam because you have the basal achila, which was not makabel tumah. Uvi mukdashim in the other zvachim ain't okay. Ela afal picha nitma basar v'chelev kayim zorikas hadam. With regard to all other zvachim, as long as you have a possibility of being maktir the chelev, because the chelev itself is available, it's tahar, then we can go ahead and be zorik the dam. There's not going to be any achilas basar. In other karbonos, it doesn't bother. Amar Rav Gidol Amar Rav. This is a revolution of sorts. Im zorak hurtza. Even in the case of a korban pesach, and it was nitma basar, there's no possibility of achilas habasar. V'yochlas habasar b'layla says, how do we know the carbon is still kosher? Meaning the bailam don't have to bring a pesach sheni. So the Gemara says, v'advina achila, the whole purpose of a korban pesach is for achila. It's got to culminate in achila. So Gemara answers, no, achila lo ma'akva. Rav holds that the carbon is meaningful in and of itself, and he was Yotzi Eschiv of Korban Pesach. Again, as we said, he doesn't have to worry about Pesach Sheni, no obligation. And that's despite the fact that there's no basar. So the Gemara asks, what about a pasuk in Chumash? V'aksiv, the Torah says in the Parsha Korban Pesach, Ish lefi achlo tachusu ala seh, lefi achlo. We need to set up a chabura of Ochlei Pesach. And that's the ultimate goal of the Pesach. And now you're telling me nitma basar, and that we're going to go ahead with the korban Pesach, and he's yotzi nechovasa, and it's hirtza carbon. He doesn't have to be korban sheni. How can that be? And the Gemara says, "Le mitzvah." You know what? We'll rewrite the pasuk, so to speak, or at least reinterpret. You thought the pasuk is saying that achila is absolutely critical for the hechsher korban Pesach. No. Achila mitzvah is absolute. No one's going to deny that. And you're going to be robbed of the mitzvah of korban pesach in event that the korban became tomei, and there's no possibility of achilas habas. Yeah, we're not talking about korban pesach shabbat b'tzibur, that hutra b'tzibur in a case of the entire tzibur being tomei. We're talking about a yachid, an individual who wants to get credit for his korban pesach. He has contracted tumah, he can't eat the basar. Says Rav, the eating of the basar is l'mitzvah. It's a very nice addition and culmination of the korban pesach, but the akrav itself is meaningful, independent of the achila. Gemara says, Liakiv lo, you're telling me the achila is only the mitzvah, but it's not critical? But Tanya, we have a brisa that says, based on the din of lekichas hapesach, and the Torah says, the michsas, melamed she'ena pesach nishcha el lenuya. Michsas means those who were manui, they were counted, they were registered on the Korban Pesach. And the brisa asks itself, yochal shchato, shalol lenuya, is Yeheki over al ha-mitzvah v'kosher. You might think, okay, he shechted it, but not for the people who are going to eat the carbon, who are registered on the carbon. Okay, not tragic, because he violated the mitzvah. There won't be a mitzvah of achila that could be fulfilled. We need menuyav, but the carbon itself is valid. Talmud lomar, ish lefi achlo tachusu hakasav shana love liaket. We have a principle in Kachim that whenever the Torah repeats itself, it's telling you that it's absolutely critical. And the Torah says, "V'michlas nefashos ish lefi achlo," and the Torah is now repeating itself. Let me just see if I have the psukim in front of me here. All right, if we have time, well, I'll open up a chumash, but the Gemara is assuming that the Torah, I know what it is. I'm sorry. Now I have it. Because the Torah says, ish lefi achlo, and now the Torah says, the michsas nefashos, tachos alaseh. Michsas nefashos is a reference to the minui of those who can eat from the Korban Pesach. So the Torah is not only saying, ish lefi achlo, but it's also saying, the michsas nefashos. And the michsas nefashos, tachosu alaseh. You must have the group of people who are going to eat the Korban Pesach. So once again, that's as far as manu is concerned. Right? The Torah is saying you have to have minuyim, and it's got to be minuyim who are designated to eat from the Korban Pesach. And let's go another step further. The iskash ochlin liminuyim. The brisa adds that there's a hekesh between shchita shalol l'shem minuyim, shalol l'minuyov, and shchita shalol li'achlav. And to the same extent that a shchita shalol l'minuyov is invalid because the Torah says ish lefi achlo tachusu b'mitznas nefashos. So too in the case of ochlin, like minuyim, if you have, let's say, in mind the shchita shalol l'shem ochlav, and you have in mind the zaken or chaluz that are capable of eating kizayis possible the Korban Pesach, the entire Korban is possible. Ela Rav di Omar Kirab Yossi. Rav is standing on the shoulders of the Tana Rav Yossi, who holds the Omar Achilas Psachim Loma Akva, that the Korban is kosher even in the absence of Achilas Habasar. So if the Pesach itself is not royal achila because the basar Pesach has contracted tumah, nevertheless it's not going to passel the korban. Notice again, l'chatchila Reb Nosson is going to read, we're not zorik the dam if we know that there's no possibility of achilas basar, but nevertheless, b'di'eved achilas basar ain't a ma'akeves according to Rabbi Nosson. And the Gemara says, where is this Rabbi Nosson that you're talking about? That achila tzeinem ha'keves, and the whole purpose of the korban is l'shem achila, and now you're telling me achila einem ha'keves? Hey, Rabbi Nosson. And now the Gemara is going to go through an analysis of various statements, brises that quote Rabbi Nosson, and see if those really are based on this predicate that achila einem ha'keves. Ilema ha, Rabbi Nosson says that you could have one shliach who's going to shecht one Korban Pesach on behalf of all of Klal Yisrael, the 1.2 million people who need a Korban Pesach. Is Ilemaha Rabbi Nosson, the Sanya we learned in the Brisa, Rabbi Nosson over Minayin Shekol Yisrael Yotzim Bekarban Echad Bepesach Echad. Tamaloma, we're going to derive it. Now, again, can you imagine how many people will get a kazayis basar of one lamb for 1.2 million people? Tamaloma shaftu also called kahal adas Yisrael bein arbayim. And the pasuk, if you translate it literally, indicates that there's going to be a shechita of one carbon on behalf of the entire kahal adas Yisrael. V'chikol kahal shoftu, halo ein shochet ela echad. There's only one shochet. So what does it mean? V'shachato kol kahal. Well, every single person in the call is going to check it. That's as if each person in Klal Yisrael shechted the carbon because they appointed a shliach, and he shechs the carbon. Now, who's going to eat the carbon? All right, we'll give out measly pieces, mitzumtzum dika pieces, exactly a kazayis basa. How many people? 10? 100? Not 1.2 million. So you see from Rabbi Nosson that ein achila makeves, that achila is not critical, because in one set you can't possibly have kazayis for everybody in Klal Yisrael. Gemara says name. Now here for this Gemara, if we were teaching a methodology of the Talmud, this would be an excellent example to train them on. Dilma shani hachi shani hasam dei mimshachi hani chazi lahani mimshachi hani chazi lahani. The Pesach itself is roy for Kol Yisrael. Okay, now it turns out that this group of people got in first. First dibs. They got permission to eat from the carbon, and the others didn't. But any Jew can eat this carbon in potential. So if Reuven and Shimon drop out, so Levi and Yehuda will take their place and replace them. Any Jew on the face of the earth could eat from that one little lamb in potential. And therefore, what Rabbi Nosson is saying is that it's as if you have a Pesach la'achila. And ein achila v'akeves in this case, even though achila is ma'akeves, because we do have achila, everyone's out there royal achila. But in the case of nitma basar, nobody can eat the carbon Pesach. And here Rabbi Nosson would agree and concede to the point that achila ma'akeves is no carbon without achila. So that Rabbi Nosson is not going to be sufficient to supply you with a source. Ella, Rabbi Nosson. Let's look at a different Rabbi Nosson in Sanya. Nimnu olav chabura achas v'chozu v'nim olav chabura cheres. So you had one chabura that joined on this Pesach, so each one will get a kazayis. And now another group floods the gates. They also join the bandwagon, and now there's not a kazayis for everyone because the group is twice as large. Is Rishonim, those who first signed up the first group, Hlem kazayis, Ochlin. It's according to Tanakama Rabbi Nosson. Uptur milasos Pesach sheni barachronim she'en lem kazayis ein Ochlim v'chayom lasos Pesach sheni. And Rabbi Nosson Omer elu v'elu uptur milasos Pesach sheni shkvar nizrak adam. Once again, there's not going to be a kazayis for everyone because the second group, and yet Rabbi Nosson recognizes the validity of the carbon. So you see that ein achila ma'akeves. Gemara says, no, I'm going to give you the same lumdus that I gave you before. Kate dilma shani hasam, the mivchachei hani, chazi lahani. Every single one of both chaburas, the whole thing, they're all roy le'achila. No one's excluded from achila. It could be that now the second group doesn't have a kazai, so they have their problem. But the carbon is kosher for all of them, says Rabbi Nosson. But the reason for that is not because ein achila ma'akeves, even though achila is ma'akeves, but there will be achila, or theoretically there could be achila. It's just that right now you have the first group that kol hakol they grabbed onto the Pesach, but once they step back, the other group will jump on the bandwagon and they'll be able to eat the carbon Pesach. There's no one who's excluded. It's not like the case of Tama. So the Gemara asks, again, the same logic that we said. In Cain, Lisnei hoil uruyim li moshech, my shikvar nizuk adam, shmamino b'dam talim yisav achila, bomak. The Gemara says the following. If you're telling me that the reason why Rabbi Nosson allows this carbon to be validated for both chaburas, the first and the second, even though the second doesn't have a roilach, it's because ein achila ma'keves. I'm sorry. No, we've rejected ein achila, but because mimchechi, because maybe the first group will pull out. So then Rabbi Nosson should have said, "Whole veruyim li Moshe." Maybe they'll pull out. Instead, read Rabbi Nosson's language carefully. He says, "Nizrak Adam," means that everything depends upon the dam and not upon the achila. Therefore, we see that achila lo ma'keves. So the Gemara says, "My dochke de Rav de mukim le masnisin lechatchila u Rabbi Nosson nukme kirabonon afilu b'diavad nami lo." What forces Rav? What compels him to learn that this Mishnah is a reflection of the Shita of Rabbi Nosson, and the whole requirement of Achila is only lechatchila, but the carbon is kosher. Why don't we just say that this Mishnah is authored by the Rabbanon, and the evidence it's possible because Achila ma'keves. And the answers Rav Masisik Shise. Rav was bothered by the language of the Mishnah. Amaisnan, why does the Mishnah say, quote, Ein Zorek es Hadam? And the Mishnah says that in the case where the basar contracted Tumah, Ein Zorek es Hadam. Listen, possible. Tell me that the carbon is possible. El Shma Mina, Ein Zorek lechatchila, but the Evet Shaper Dami. There is a Ritzi carbon, no need for Pesach Sheni. The Pesach is kosher. If B'di'evet, they went ahead and they were Zorek the dam, which means that B'di'evet ein achila ma'keves. The Gemara says, Rab Nosson, the old question that we asked originally against Rav, Ish lefi achlo lomali. It sounds like we need achila, and that's critical. And in the case where nitma basa, we don't have achila. How can the carbon be kosher? And the Gemara answers that from this pasuk we're going to derive to be inon gavra de chazi lachila. That in a case where not the basar contracted tumah, but the person contracted tumah, he's not a gaver chazi lachil, he's not roy lecha. And although Rabbi Nosson says achilei ma'keves, that's only with regard to the basar of the pesach, but not with regard to the person. He's got to be roy lachil. The Gemara asks, "Man tana the tana the ha the tana rabbanan chchato li ochla." V'zorak domo shaloli ochlov hapesach asmo kosher v'odom yotzi v'echevvaso. The brisa that we're quoting now speaks about a carbon pesach that was shechted shaloli ochlov. In other words, there wasn't enough for a kazais to go around for each member of the group. And then they went ahead and they was zorik the dam shaloli ochlov. In other words, they did the zrika for the purpose of a zaken or a chol who's not capable of achila. The pesach itself is kosher. No, the zrika sadam naktar sachelev is all valid for adam yotzik dechovaso, but you're not allowed to eat the carbon because it was shalo li ochlav kiman is nema Rabbi Nosson he velo Rabbanon. Should we say that this reflects the shita of Rabbi Nosson that achileinu ma'keves b'di'evet, and it's against the Rabbanon because they hold achilas pesach ma'keves, and in this case there's no possibility of achila because the zrika sadam was shelo liochlav. And Gemara rejects this hafilu temer Rabbanon. Even if you want to reconcile this brisa with the shita of the Rabbanon, it's still not a question. Why? Because when it says HaPesach Atzmo Kosher, what does that mean? It means that Ein Machsheves Ochlin Bizrika. It means that the fact that at the time of the Zrika he had a Machshav Chaloli Ochlav, that's meaningless. And we've discussed this in the past when we learned Tamid Nishchat, that at the time of the Zrika there's no Machsheves Ochlin. Man Tana Lahad Tana Rabbanan HaReisha Hayachole B'Shas Shchita. If he was incapable of eating from the carbon pesach at the time he shechted, but he became healthy at the time of the zrika, or vice versa, he was sick at the time of the shchita. I'm sorry, he was healthy at the time of the shchita. I read the word cholim in Hebrew. No, cholim is Aramaic for healthy. V'cholim b'shas zrika. is in all these cases ain't shoktim is talking about shecholim mishashchita shasrika. Kiman neimed kirabanan even lo kiravinasa. Because Rabbi Nosson holds that Eina Achila Ma'keves. So why are you telling me that you require that he has to be royal Achila both from the time of the Shechita and all the way till the culmination of the time of the Shechita must be the Rabbanon? And he says, Afilu Temer Rabbi Nosson, Gavre de Chazi L'Achila Be'inon. We must have a person, the Bailam of the Carbon, who's royal Achila. And he's got to be royal Achila at two critical moments, at the Shashchita and the Shas Zrika. Again, whether the carbon itself is royal achila, that's where Reb Nosson holds it's not ma'akev, vein achila ma'akev, but we need a gavra who's chazi. Man tana lahad Torah Rabbana, who's the author of the brisa that says chato b'tara. If he shechted the carbon and the carbon and the bailim are both tahorim, yachikach, and before the zrika sadam nitmu bailim, and they cannot possibly eat from the carbon bituma. It's nevertheless Yizorik Adam bitara, the al yochal basa bituma. Again, this sounds like Rabbi Nosson, because what we're saying is that the Bailam could fulfill their chiyuv even though there's no possibility of their eating the basa. Is Keman on Rabbi Lazar b'machloket shnuya Rabbi Nosson. That don't think that everybody unanimously accepts this brisa, the ruling of this brisa. This brisa reflects a das yochid, the individual opinion of Rabbi Nosson, that achila eina ma'keves. Therefore, who cares if at the time of the Zrikas Adam, the bailim are not roy lechol min ha-pesach. Rabbi Yochanan Amar afilu teim rabbanan. I can reinterpret this brisa so that it can be reconciled with the rabbanan. Hachamay askinan b'tzibur. We're talking about a case where Rova the Tzibur are Tmeim. And this occurred, I guess, when the Nasi died and they all went to the funeral, between the Shechita and the Zrika. And the Afilu B'tuma Nami Avdi, that the Tzibur can bring this Korban Pesach even B'tuma, because it's Rov HaTzibur Tmeim, and therefore it's a Pesach Abba B'tuma. And therefore, even though they became Tomei, nevertheless, we could go ahead and do the Zrika Sadam. So the Gemara immediately objects. Ibet Tzibur Amai Eina Basa Nechal Betuma. Why does the Brisa say Al Yiachel Basa Betuma? We know that in Korban Pesach it's Ba Betuma, it's Nechal Betuma. And the Gemara answers it's the Rabbanon. Gzeira, the Chachamim said that we're not going to allow you to eat the Basar Betuma. Why? Shema, because next year, what are you going to think? Yitamu Abailim. In other words, the tzibur became tuma li achar azrika, and this halacha that we bring the korban pesach b'tuma is only if they were tmeim before the zrika. But next year they became tummy after the zrika. The yomru, and mistakenly they can say Eshtakat last year lo nitamnu v'achalnu, we were not tummy and we ate the pesach. The shchita was done b'tara. Hashta namni now too. Why shouldn't we be able to eat the Pesach b'tuma, even though the shchita and the zrika were both b'tara? They think if last year, when the shchita was b'tara, we ate the korban Pesach, even though we were tmeim, is this year also? Even though both the shchita and the zrika was betara, we can go ahead and we're allowed betuma to eat the korban pesach. For lo yadi, and they don't understand the difference. The eshtekad ki is darik dam bailim tmeim. Last year, when they did the zrika sadam, the bailim were tmeim, and therefore this is a pesach haba betuma, which is nechal betuma hashta. But this year, bailim tahorim havu. At the time of the Zrika, the Bailam Ta'orim. That's when they became tummy after the Zrika. And since the Pesach now is a Pesach Ba B'Tara, both the Shchita and culminating with the Zrika was all done B'Tara, they're not allowed to eat it B'Tuma. Therefore, because of this Chashash, the Rabbanim made a Gzeira, and they said you're not allowed to eat the Korban Pesach B'Tuma. even in a case where we're going to apply the principle of Tuma Hutra B'tzibur, Tuma Tchuya B'tzibur, which Rov Yisrael Tmeim, but we're always afraid that if we let him eat the Karban B'tuma, then even in a case where there is no Karban Pesach B'tuma, i.e., when they contract the Tuma after the Zrika, they're going to go ahead and eat the Basar without making the distinction. And Iboy Seima, this will conclude for today on Daf Ayin Tes Amud Aleph. Rav the Omar Kir Rabbi Yeshua, and Rabbi Yeshua is the one who holds that Achilas HaPesach Eina Me'akeves. The Sanya, and that's what we're going to learn in a Brisa, that Rabbi Yeshua Omer Kol Azvachim Shebetorah, etc. We'll read this in Mishem tomorrow, but just keep in mind that tomorrow we want to fill in this Brisa that indicates that according to Rabbi Yeshua, Achilas HaPesach Eina Me'akeves. As a result, we now understand this sheet of Rabbi Yochanan and how to work that out based on Rabbi Yeshua. Okay, then? So I'll wish you all a great day, and thank you so much.